you release him. He's not who I have for you. I have someone better.
I never knew that God wanted to have relationships. Well, it's that time again. It's time for Life Talk. Life Talk, Life Talk, Life Talk, Life Talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Life Talk. You know I have the most brilliant friends in the world. Do you know that? One of my closest friends, who's actually like a sister friend, she's not even just a friend, she's a sister. Dr. Valencia Montgomery is back visiting with me in Ghana. So, I had to take advantage of our relationship and get her to share tidbits of wisdom with us again. If you recall, the last time we got together, we had an amazing discussion about anxiety and depression. So I wanted to pick her brain on a few other issues because a lot has happened since the last time she visited. Oh, by the way, we're not the only ones on this show. I'm surrounded by all of my Shih Tzu family. I'm a Shih Tzu mommy. And so if you hear some purring or snoring, no, it's not Valencia or I. Okay. Now, back on topic. The last time she was here was before COVID, and a lot has happened since then. Uh, Me, for instance, I flew to London for a speaking engagement, and my president shut the borders of my country, and which was Ghana, and I was in London for 7 months during the pandemic, got to experience lockdown in a different country. So not only did I experience lockdown, I experienced lockdown in a different country. Now, there was some mixed reviews on the whole lockdown experience, okay? Um, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. She said I had an issue. I did a lot of stuff during that. I mean, I took a coaching certification course. I hung out with people online. I found some new teachers. I just loved it. I loved the solitude. I loved all of it. Some people had immense problems with it. And one of the things that really were impacted, not just employment, but relationships. And I think that a lot of people are still recovering from that time. Some people found out they hated each other and got divorced during that time. A lot of babies were made. And one of my friends said, she called me one day and she said, "Girl, I discovered something about my husband." And I said, "What?" She said, "I really like him."
Good to know.
So some people rediscovered love during lockdown, made babies, and went on with their lives, and other relationships fell apart. And as I said, I really want to talk more to Valencia about the fact that a lot of people have had difficulty re-engaging. I know that for a long time, well, we didn't go to church. People went to church online. Some people discovered they loved that and still have not gone back to church, okay? So churches have suffered in the fallout of COVID. Their numbers have not gotten back to where they were for a lot of churches. I won't say all of them, but for a lot of them. Hey, some pastors told me during COVID, they liked lockdown. Giving went up. Everyone was watching online. They had bigger audiences than when they had people in church. So there were lots of different dynamics relationally and socially that occurred. And so I wanted to talk to Valencia about this because she's the brainiac in our duo. So I had to get her take on what really happened, do you think? What were the top three things that you noticed more about people and how they responded and are still reacting post-pandemic to relationships?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the group of people.
Okay.
So
let's
for
separate.
healthcare workers,
Mhm.
right, because most of us
Mhm.
were still working while the rest of the world got to stay at home.
Mhm.
There was a higher rate of suicide
Hmm.
amongst healthcare workers,
Wow.
particularly doctors. We also noticed that younger people were having a really hard time coping.
Why is that?
So when you think about generational things, you think about things like the plague and how that was everyone in the world experienced it. So when you have those events where everyone experiences it, but not everyone is at the same level, age-wise or experience-wise, it hits us differently.
Okay.
So we always think about younger people as not really knowing their mortality. So very few, there's not like a ton of them out there experiencing death up close and personal necessarily.
Right.
Maybe a grandparent or a distant relative, but not necessarily up close and personal. And this cohort had to face that with friends getting sick and suddenly dying, family members suddenly dying, going into the hospital, not coming back, not being able to say goodbye. So that was a huge thing.
Yeah, I lost 30 people, and my favorite uncle died during that time. One of my favorite uncles, I've got 2 uncle daddies, and he's one of them. He died, and I wasn't able to attend the funeral. And that was a little traumatic. There's no closure there. You know, I spoke to him, and he suddenly contracted COVID while in the hospital for something else and died. And it was just shocking.
Yeah, and then there's that misunderstanding of, or that lack of understanding of where to put your faith.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things were coming out. We were trying, as scientists, we were trying to understand the virus in real time versus having the retrospective ability to study a virus, right? Because we were trying to learn about transmission rates and mutations. And this virus in particular, the thing about it is that unknown. You could get COVID and maybe you couldn't breathe, or maybe you'd have strokes, or maybe you'd have a heart attack, or maybe, right?
It was hitting different things.
Or maybe you would have no symptoms, but then later on would experience long COVID. So it was like this roll of the dice. If I get COVID, anything from nothing to death could happen to me. There was that kind of reality that people had to deal with. So there's a lot of pressure. There's pressure going out in public, having to get food. How am I living? I'm on lockdown. How am I getting money? There's all those things. Then for a medical profession.
Yes, that's what I wanted to get to. I wanted to know why the high suicide rate.
Yeah, so a lot of doctors had COVID patients. They were watching people die without being able to help. And, you know, whether they want to admit it or not, a lot of medical doctors have a slight complex. Because, I mean, usually we have the tools available, especially in certain countries, to help, you know, and it seems like something like a virus should not be killing them massively as it was. So I think the long hours, they themselves were being exposed. And we weren't sure. Yeah, exhaustion. They themselves were being exposed. At the hospital I was on the inpatient rehab unit. So I worked through the whole pandemic. And I worked with people who were actually going to the COVID floors. We were watching our hospital turn over to COVID floors, floor by floor. And people weren't able to go home a lot of times because they weren't sure how the virus was carried back to families. They didn't want to expose their own families. So for months, people weren't seeing families. So the medical profession, maybe some of those individuals maybe already had a proclivity towards having problems with mental health. And then all of a sudden you have no support anyway, because how can I support you when I'm trying to support the world, you know? And so there's that, the younger people, a lot of younger people have always clung to social media as the way, and some people actually did thrive. You know, businesses were birthed and people learned a new way of existing.
Zoom blew up.
Yeah, existing in the world. But at the same time, I think that some younger people may realize that they really do need that interaction, that in-person, you know, connection.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to say, oh, I prefer social media when you have options.
Yeah.
But when your options are taken away, then you begin to understand maybe social media wasn't as much of your life as you thought it was, right? And so I think that also, you have all these sudden deaths of people that are your age, and you have the fear and you have all the changing news, because as we learn about the virus, we update people. You have the rush for vaccines. You have all the political stuff that was going on, all the ethnicity things, all the Black, you know, Lives Matter stuff that was going on in the world. I mean, it was being watched across the world.
Yeah.
So you had
and
all
then
these,
in the middle of it, George Floyd couldn't breathe.
Right, no, and Breonna Taylor and all the other names that we could go through right now. And so that was a lot. And the constant barrage, most people didn't turn off the news.
That's true.
And that created an anxiety in and of itself
Yes,
in
it
many
did.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the kicker. There were not enough, and there still are not enough psychological mental health professionals to support what happened, right? And so people are trying to see doctors, therapists, whatever. They can't get, even now, they can't get in for months. And then if they do, they don't have the normal schedule of visits, like weekly. So, I was happy to see that some people tried to get online and provide ways for people to take a step back and remember to reach out if you're feeling like you're suicidal or, but you're trying to give people tools that they never had in a short burst, and that just doesn't work. And so I really believe that had a lot to do with it. On the flip side, you had our older adults who were more vulnerable population, and more vulnerable because they had to isolate. Isolation is terrible for older adults because it does progress any underlying, it allows any underlying neurodegenerative disease to progress faster. Yeah, so as people started to come back and re-engage, what they were finding was that their older adult parents were not doing as well as they had been prior to COVID. And so the people showing up in my office are like, they were fine before COVID, and then all of a sudden now their memory's bad, they have poor attention, I'm afraid to leave them alone. And that's because probably before COVID happened, they may have had the beginning signs of a neurodegenerative process. And during COVID, because of the isolation, it allowed that to progress faster. But believe it or not, anxiety and depression can also cause people to look like, older adults to look like they have dementia, but they actually don't. And so some of the people that were bringing people in, it was like, this is actually anxiety that I'm seeing, or this is actually a mood disorder, depression.
From the isolation.
So it's more a psychogenic cause than it is a neurodegenerative cause.
What would you say, what did we discover really mattered more during COVID? What did isolation make us realize about relationships?
Well, I think we realized that the in-person thing is a real thing. In fact, most people prefer, from what I understand, most people prefer face-to-face time with their therapist than the Zoom or the other virtual platforms, that it gives you a different kind of connectedness. Maybe people learn that smaller groups are better than the larger groups because you feel more connected. Your support is different in that smaller group, because when people started being allowed to gather again, it was only in small groups, in at least in the U.S. It was along. And I think actually being aware of how much exposure we have to people's germs became like a real thing. And so some people actually triggered OCD in those people. And so there are all kinds of ways this affected our mental health. I always try to describe mental health as being on a ruler, a spectrum. It's actually taught in a lot of ways, it's taught that way, where you have what we consider normal, and then midway through it's kind of like borderline, you're neurotic, basically. You're closer, and then you have what we consider psychopathy, where you actually have a hard time existing in a world without help. So the further you are along that line, this could push you right on over if you don't have coping skills to help you control it and deal with it. There were more substance use overdoses during this time. And I think one of the reasons why is because where were most of the emergency calls going? They were going to take care of COVID things. And so maybe it drew some of the resources away from those people that were overdosing. So
abuse also went up. Physical abuse
that's
escalated
the other thing,
because people were trapped with each other.
Right. And think about it. If you ever experience anger during the pandemic about the George Floyd, or the constant barrage of, these images of violence, or, your temper, you're mad at the world, but you don't have a way to get that out because you can't do any of the things, or maybe you're one of the people on the spectrum that has a problem managing your anger.
Or you're frustrated over employment and money and lack of resources,
Well, that's
lack
when
of
those
help.
differences come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a free spender, hey, worry about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you've been kind of like allowing that because we have jobs and
Mm-hmm.
money's coming in, and all of a sudden, the biggest thing is, when will this end?
Yes.
When will I be able to return to my normal?
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing. This is the new normal. We're more aware of germs. We're more aware of how things are transmitted.
But
And
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because I thought this was very interesting. One of my friends works in the franchise business, fast food,
Mm-hmm.
and they lost a lot of workers during that time. And so one day I asked her, I said, "Well, why are you having such trouble
Oh my
finding
gosh.
workers?" And she said, "Well, most of them died because they were low income people. They didn't have access to medical care. So a lot of the people, they keep saying people don't want to come back to work. A lot of people are just dead, so they're not coming back to work." And I was like, "Whoa!" I mean, that hadn't even struck me. But there is also this reluctance to work to come back to the workplace. What do you think about that? Where is that coming from?
That's an interesting. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, a lot of our older adults were still in the workforce, basically full time, filling a lot of these roles.
Mm-hmm.
They were the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
They should have been retired anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but they were filling spaces that we didn't appreciate until we now see how many of them were filling places, for one. Secondly, social media has encouraged people to be more entrepreneurial, I think. Some of the systems set in place by certain governments also encouraged a certain, when you get paid more to stay home than you make, it speaks to the fact that people are not being paid a living wage.
Yeah.
And during the time and the extent that they receive money, and I know in the U.S., a lot of people were making more money staying at home than they ever made going to a job flipping burgers. I also think we had made way more franchises than we needed, right? And I think as the world as the economy has grown and economies have thrived, and this isn't psychological, but think about it. I mean, we have easy access in the U.S. You don't, in certain communities, you don't have to walk very far to get to Starbucks.
Sure.
If you walk 5 blocks, it's too far. You should have 2 Starbucks within 5 blocks. But seriously, you have to have people to employ to work those places. Now we have fewer employees. We have fewer older adults in the workforce as they used to be. A lot of people that were not what we consider older adults anymore, they just decided to retire, because they're like, why? I mean, people started to recognize that life is not infinite.
Yeah.
There is an end date. And man, I don't want to wait till I'm 65, 70. If I can retire now and do the things that I said that when I get this age I would do, I'm going to do it now. People begin to realize that maybe scaling back on luxuries and things like that would allow them or permit them to retire. So there's all these reasons. Like, why would I go and work like a slave and make this amount of money when the government has already shown us that we need this amount to live off of?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, like, you're paying me $8 an hour, but the government just gave me $2,000, whatever, $3,000. I don't know what it was because I worked still, so I didn't get the benefit of that. But, it's like, hey, I can feed myself without worrying. I can pay my bills. Then people didn't pay rent in the U.S. People didn't pay rent for a year. So, and then they used that. So they had all this. They were flush with cash,
Wow.
in a way that they haven't been before. And how would you behave if you suddenly went from poverty to median, basically, way of living because you're not paying that rent, things like that. And I just think that when you have tasted the fruit of abundance, it's hard to reverse and go back to this. So somehow people have just found ways to make money. And I think one of those ways is getting social media, getting likes. So I know a lot of people think it's just about, oh, they love me. But I think they're
That
dollar
whole
signs.
dopamine.
Yeah, there is a dopamine hit.
But
You
some people
know,
are making big money.
but people are making money. But that's why things like websites like OnlyFans.
What's OnlyFans?
Yeah. So, it's different. It's really supposed to be a place where you can sell things, I guess. But people have sold themselves, basically.
Oh.
You pay to get access to content, basically, right? And so, y'all, I'm talking off camera to one of you youngins. You pay, and so girls have like gotten sexy on there, and some people have made quite a bit of money where they've bought family houses, like parents' houses and stuff.
Oh my.
And so, like I said, people are taking whatever commodity they have and taking it online, and found a way to get that segment of the audience or of the consumer and make money.
Wow.
Without any physical contact.
Well, people got very innovative, I must say.
Did.
I mean, I created online courses. I created a love masterclass. I did a book club. I created a regular meeting every Saturday. I had 300 and 400 people logged on, having different discussions, and it was amazing. It was a whole new world. And then the world opened back up, and I had to scale back some of those activities because as the world opened up, some people were very excited about getting out there. And some people got out there, I thought, prematurely. And then others are still lingering. Let's talk about church for a minute. Some churches, they folded during that time. Others flourished. I think that it got lifted and separated, really. Great teachers, their ante went up. People said, wow, I've never heard this before. People were going to church 9 and 10 times a day. They could surf different churches on Sunday, and people found new teachers, new modes of thinking, and they did not go back to their little churches where they just had an emotional fest with no information.
And that's what I was going to say. I'm like, because those people that deliver messages that are highly emotive, they need the feedback from the people there. And you can't get that. And the people there need to feel all the emotions going around too, right? Because it's catchy.
Yeah.
And so those people probably didn't have a very good time of it. The other thing is the content. We know that you're not keeping me on this Zoom call for an hour and a half. So if you're teaching, it better get to the point pretty quickly. Tell me them verses, or my mind is onto something else, because I'm in my, the other thing is the comfort level. I'm in my pajamas. I didn't have to get up. I didn't have to dress a certain way. I don't have anybody looking me up and down with elevator eyes. I don't have to deal with the mothers in the church telling me my skirt too short.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it allowed us just the freedom of experiencing our faith in another way. The interactive conversations that happen, like on things like Clubhouse, I didn't care for.
Clubhouse was.
Yeah.
That was a bit much for me.
Yeah, I didn't care for that as much.
But people needed to talk, and it was a way to connect in conversations.
Exactly.
So I found it very, very interesting. As I said, I had several pastor friends who are all great teachers, by the way. Their attendance went up online. They were reaching more people online than they were in their physical buildings. Some of them said, I don't ever have to go back to a building. They were doing so well. Giving went up.
And it
was so interesting. And some of my pastor friends did something very interesting. They actually banked all the extra money and then gave their workers bonuses, which was very nice, I thought. But I found that I still have a lot of friends that have not gone back to church. And I'm a minister, okay, but they haven't gone back to church. They still enjoy online. They give online, and they get on with their day. They just prefer it. One of my pastor friends had me cracking up. He says, now I know what they do when they're watching church, because I was away. I traveled, and I tuned into my church. And he said, I got up and I made coffee and I did different things.
And so
he says, so now I know what really happens. So, all of that being said, we live in a world now that is very, very, um, what can I say? It's split.
Mhm.
And there's a split. I think that some people have found their comfort level online, and some people are just social beings and they've got to get out. Even I've just been a reluctant re-enter into the world. I find that I'm not interested in being in crowded spaces and places and things like that. And I don't know if it's because of the rise in violence or if it's just that I'm just more careful
Well, you're
because
more
that's
aware of the
it's still
risks.
out there, guys. It's still out there,
It is.
varying, you know.
It
And so
is.
I crawled out for a concert for my birthday, but did so cautiously and wore my mask. And
Mhm.
if I'm on the plane, I still wear my mask because actually I discovered something. I discovered I always used to get a cold when I was on the plane before, and since I've been wearing a mask on the plane, I don't get colds anymore. So I've kind of just decided that's going to be my mode of how I fly from now on.
Mhm.
But all of that being said, how do we move forward? How do we recapture life? How do we reestablish relationships and become more social again without fear?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to recognize that it's not instant. It wasn't instant when there was the plague, and it won't be instant now.
Okay.
There were years of recovery after that where people had to experience the okay, it's safe to be breathing the air freely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as long as we're aware of those things, then we can understand that whatever normal will be, it won't happen overnight.
Okay. That's good.
Okay, so it won't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the virus is still mutating, but what people don't understand is you only really hear, unless you're a sciencey type person and you're looking for it, you only hear about the variants that are spreading faster. But each variant has a lineage, it has a subvariant, it has a sub-subvariant. So there are all those. It just depends on where I'm not going to get into that. But it depends on where it mutates, okay?
Mhm.
So in the replication process, that's why some things are like, they just make you feel like you have a cold, some have no symptoms, some are very contagious, but maybe mild, so in part, it seems like it's spinning itself out,
Mm-hmm.
but then a bigger mutation will erupt and they'll say, oh, we're watching this. But the WHO has its eye on all the mutations in every country.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people are concerned about that, they can always look that information up and say, oh, in this region, this variant, and these are the risk factors. Is it moderate? Is it severe? Etc. And then adjust accordingly. If you don't want to do that kind of information, then you have to decide how much risk you're willing to take in order to live, right? Because part of the depression and anxiety is, oh, I can't do anything. I used to, maybe some of the people are like me. I used to travel so much more, and I live to get out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a person that traveled more and for whatever reasons you can't at this time, I have a friend that does this mental walk through trips he's taken before with postcards. And he'll pull those postcards out and just take time to recollect the enjoyment of that place.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have photos, that's another way to take a mental walk,
Mm-hmm.
a mental visit, a mental travel to that place. Engage in more things locally. If you're not ready to go out into big crowds, go out to one of the events where you can sit further out but still hear the music.
Mm-hmm.
Or, usually in places that have music, if you just go park your car somewhere nearby, you can hear the music because it's so loud. So maybe that's going to be your date night for right now. You know what I mean? But we have to be more creative. Wear a mask. Who cares if everybody's staring at you? That's part of the problem with us, is that we care too much about
you need to do
exactly.
to feel safe.
So you do what you need to do to feel safe
Mm-hmm.
and feel like I can engage properly. And if someone asks you why, I know people stare at me all the time because I wear my mask a lot around the city where I live.
Mm-hmm.
Because I work with a vulnerable population.
Sure.
And I have never had COVID, and I'm hoping to God that I don't, because I worry about infecting my older adults.
Mm-hmm.
But people stare at me, and if anybody were to walk up to me and say, why are you wearing a mask? And I would tell them, for your protection.
Mm-hmm.
For your protection. How about that? And then they kind of just look at you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your protection. How do you know what I have?
Right.
But really it's from my protection. Okay? So things like that. Learn some meditate. I think meditation is so underappreciated for so many reasons. But find a good meditation app or something and spend a day, especially on those high anxiety days, where you just let that be your place that you go to get the skills and coping you need to get through the day. Friendships, even if you have a small circle. Sometimes we make pacts and we agree that nobody's going to do any risky behavior, right? If we're planning a group that way nobody feels like they're overly exposed, right? If that's possible. Otherwise, do it with a small group. Wear your mask. Keep your antibiotic, spray or whatever you use to if you're gonna eat out. But don't get crazy with that anymore. I mean, I think some people are just like, oh, I can't eat that chip. I haven't washed my hands. When I was like, remember before when you didn't wash your hands ever? We still need some of those germs, people. We still need them to fight off other things. Just be aware of your own emotional state. If you're starting to feel like you're wanting to isolate more when you maybe didn't used to be isolative, that's an indication that maybe a mood problem is going on. If you start to get kind of hesitant and antsy about joining in things, that's an indication that maybe anxiety is becoming a problem. If you're starting to feel like if you don't do these, wash my hand 3 times and tap on the door, check the door, whatever. If you start to doing that's an indication that there may be problems with obsessive compulsive disorder. If you start thinking, why am I here? Why is life worth it? What's the meaning of life? I'm worth more to others dead or not alive. Those are concerning thoughts that maybe suicide is starting to be a consideration, and we want to hit that right when you start having them. And so if you're worried, I want to say this if I can.
You can.
If you're someone that's worried, if you're someone that's feeling lonely, sad, left out, like you don't fit in, and you started thinking about what life would be like and how people would feel if you had died, or if you died, or how you would be better off if you were dead, and you have a weapon in your home, please make sure that weapon is locked, separate from the ammunition, unloaded. Now, I hear people all the time saying, well, how is that going to help me if somebody breaks into your house? Well, if you live with someone, you can give them access to those things and you release your access to them. So what I'm saying is, until those thoughts pass, you should not have access to an easy way to end your life. Because unfortunately, suicide is not necessarily something planned out forever and ever and ever for everyone. A lot of times it's an act of impulse. And all I want you to do is I want you to put some space between the impulse and the ability to complete. So find someone that you can talk to, make a plan. If you start to feel like life is not worth it, what will you do? Number 1, can you answer that question? Is there someone you can call? Is there someone you can tell you're feeling that way? If that person is not available, how will you get help? If your answer is calling 911, yes. If your answer is going to the ER, yes. If your answer is going to the local church to pray, yes. Okay? Number 3, what do you have to live for? Do you have pets? Do you have loved ones? Do you have children? Do you have family who care about you? Do you have, we all have something to contribute to the world.
Yeah.
So understanding and writing those things down, those are the things you're going to look to when life begins to look like it's not bearable anymore. Get it with a group. There are plenty of online groups. Get with someone your age, groups your age, because you'll have more to relate to usually with those people. If you're an artist and you guys are, remember, going through this the same time, trying to get back into the theater, trying to get the shows back up and running, trying to get the audience to come back. You guys are all dealing with the same kinds of emotions around that. So make a group. If nobody made one, you make one. You're able to do that. But we need to be a village right now for each other. And I think that that's one of the most important things that I feel like it's really important to talk about, is how do we now become a village? Because for so long we've been individuals in our own little, paradise.
I kind of think of life is like a pool. If you're outside, test the water. You don't have to jump in head first. One step at a time down into the pool, adjust to the water, adjust to the temperature, and then decide how deep you want to go. But just keep it moving. Don't just stand there looking at this wonderful thing you could be experiencing, and out of fear you don't. Step into it, step by step. I think that there's a natural progression that happens when we make a decision.
And so that's what I was going to say. So a lot of people are afraid that once they make a decision, all the other decisions are defunct. And in a way, yes, they are. However, remember, even if you fail at something or it doesn't work out, if you've tried it and you've given it your best shot, that's worth something. And now you get to go back and revisit those other choices.
Yeah.
Make a different one.
And what's the worst that could happen? So
Right.
you did it and it didn't work out. Start again.
Right.
Say yes to your next, okay?
Say next to your,
Yes.
say yes to your next for sure.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps.
It does help, Maybe I'll go out a little more often after this.
And you're not by yourself. Many people around the world are experiencing the same things you are today. Just know that it's normative.
Thank you, Valencia.
You're welcome. It's
See, I
always my
told you she was
pleasure.
really smart. Oh, if this blessed you and it helped you in any way, like, subscribe, turn on that notification button so you know when we do our next session together. And don't be selfish. Share it with a friend, and we'll see you next time.